I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. It's Friday at the end of the work week and our last show of the week. And on the phone with me, Ian Burns, all the way from Ottawa. How's it looking out in Ottawa? Are you there, Mr. Ian? Are we having another hiccup here? Ian? Oh, Are you there, Ian?
I'm here.
You fell asleep for a while, or what's going on?
I was in the green room, just chilling out,
Green room?
hobnobbing in the green room.
Eating all the M&Ms, I take it.
But now I've been allowed in. I've been granted permission to enter the studio.
We'll just turn you down a bit there. The big game last night, and it delivered with drama and overtime. And Connor McDavid takes his role as Canada's hero, takes over for Sidney Crosby when he scored that gold medal winning game a number of years ago. And then if I even look back even further, the 1987 Canada Cup, when Gretzky passed the torch to Mario Lemieux with the game winner that time too, right? So there you go. So we have three Canadian heroes over time. Lemieux to Sidney Crosby to now Connor McDavid from the beginnings of the great one as well. There you go. Big game though, right? Overtime. And it was
Lovely jubbly.
a 15-year anniversary of Sidney Crosby's iconic golden goal, like I said. And then if we look back further, I think the passing of the torch, some Canadian great hockey players there, right? Like if you look at that, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and then who was line mate, was actually brought up Sidney Crosby there, and now Connor McDavid. I took a photo of Connor McDavid once at the Young Guns here, so I'm getting old here if I can remember all the way back to that, right?
He is considered to be the best in the world, isn't he, old Connor?
Yeah, Connor McDavid. He is Canada's. I don't know what they did. It was Gretzky, then the next one or something like that. I can't even remember how it all went. But Lemieux was, still my favorite player of all time, Mario Lemieux. Great.
I wish I could. I wish I could join you, but I honestly don't really know that much about hockey. I do like it though. It is a very good game to watch, I think.
Yeah, no, it's got a lot. It's fast moving, great game, and then a nice win for Canada. Like a good reason for Canadians to wrap the flag around themselves to find a little bit of national pride for sure. That was a great win and a build out to be one of the best games. Lots of hype, obviously, and the hype delivered for Canada.
Yeah, and also very, very nice to slap the Americans in the face, isn't it? It wouldn't have been as fun if it was Sweden or somebody like that.
No. And anyway, and a little bit of drama prior to the game there with a little payback from the fans in Boston there with booing our national anthem.
Yeah, those scallywags, Bostonian scallywags, how dare they?
They were just giving it back, actually. So there you go.
Well, the booze started because their guy started
Yeah.
saying unpleasant things, so they started it. But I would say about this change of lyric here.
Yeah.
I mean, I get
You
that
can go to
it's
the next
like
slide, Rommel.
it's kind of funny that she did that,
Mhm.
but could she not at least have tried to be literate? Why did she have to be illiterate? That only us command. No, she just sounds stupid because
Yeah.
that's not the English language. Just sound like she doesn't quite understand English. It should be we.
Anyway, we'll leave it there. Again, big win for Canada, and like I said, Canadians needed that, and because we've been living in a world of a post-national state, and that gives another reason for Canada to feel very proud of who we are, and our game that we love to call Canada's game. And we haven't won a Stanley Cup for a while, so maybe that'll bode well for the next Stanley Cup win too. Like we haven't won the Cups, I think, since 1993. So that would be great.
Atrocious.
Yeah. Time for the Edmonton Oilers and Connor McDavid to pull off another big win, right? So they went to the Game 7. So maybe Connor McDavid's got more in him. So
Let's hope so.
Turning to BC, ex-corners say BC's drug policy overhaul looks like an impulsive political decision. Any thoughts
Well,
on? Yeah.
it's like the line that sticks out in this that this woman, I mean, I don't know why is she even chirping in anyway? Like, she doesn't do the job anymore, but whatever. She's chosen to stick her neck out and say this. But the line that I think is most interesting here is where she says, it's really disturbing that our politicians, who we rely on to keep us safe, are more likely to respond to ideological arguments than science. I just think, what do you think democracy is? What do you think politics is? It's not it's not that somebody like her gets to say, this is the science. You don't understand it. We're going to do this. That's not how our system works. It never has. And I hope it never does work that way. It works by people who cast votes and put politicians in power so that they can make decisions based on a wide spectrum of things, including morality. That's how this works. And David Eby realized and acknowledged that the morality of this situation was infuriating the British Columbia electorate. So it was changed. So I just don't get why these people think that they can just wade in and say, "Oh, that's not the science. Like we must kind of ignore the politicians." That means let's ignore democracy. I mean, I just feel like they lack the self-awareness to know that that's what they're advocating, and I just think it's a little bit it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. It's a little bit gruesome to hear
Yeah. I,
that angle being taken.
I would say those words, science and expert, has lost a lot of weight with a lot of people, right? It's been overused, and especially you put science in quotes lots of times, right? So, I mean, it comes to a whole bunch of things where they've been meant to, shame people into silence and stuff like that, right? People should still be able to entitled to their opinions.
But also, it's like this idea that science like is all in capital letters and it's like a monument somewhere in the desert and it's just always right. It's just, oh no, that's science. That's right. That is also not how science works. There are
No.
many people within the world of science who disagree with handing out hydromorphone pills to drug addicts. Believe it or not, something as obvious as that. There are scientists who think that's a very stupid idea. What she means is my opinion on the science, the side that I choose to interpret as correct. But then she comes out and says it's almost like, oh no, I've been up to Mount Sinai and I've got the tablets. Here's the truth. If you ignore me, then you're a barbarian. It's like I think people have had enough of that, haven't they, at this point? And I just think it's very ill judged from this
And I would say the same thing
unemployed
for
woman.
when they trot out the word expert, like the local expert or whatever, expert, expert, expert. And there you go. We did the same thing. Kent Mulgat, our local expert, went out to talk to an expert and on economics and international trade. And we're going to play this clip for you.
And we're joined by Dr. Ross Hickey, an associate professor in economics, and just the kind of person you want to talk to if you want to sort fact from fiction here. How worried should we be about threats of 25% tariffs against everything we sell to the United States?
I think we should be prepared and concerned. I don't think I would use the word worried. I think it's a big increase in prices that will be faced by Americans if the United States puts tariffs on our products that we sell to the Americans. So in some sense, they should be more worried about it than us because they're the ones who will actually bear the burden of most of the tariffs that the United States government places on Canadian exports.
Okay, wouldn't it sort of resolve itself with the person purchasing the stuff saying we can't afford it at that rate and forcing the producer of the material to take at least part of the hit themselves?
Yeah, that's right. So depending on how competitive markets are, some of the incidents, this is what we call in taxation, we talk about tax incidents. So part of the incidence is going to be borne by the seller, part's going to be borne by the buyer. For the things that we sell to the US that there's not very many alternatives, they're going to bear more of the burden. Like, so for example, oil and gas exports. There's a world market for oil and gas, right? But how much accessibility is there to non-Canadian oil and gas for those states in the United States that are relying on our oil and gas exports? That's the big question about how much incidence will.
There you go. If you want to watch the full video on that, you can go to KelownaNow.com, and there's the full video. It runs about 5 minutes. Again, lots of people realize that the tariffs will hurt the Americans just as much as they'll hurt Canadians. A lot of it is bluster, I believe, and hopefully as we get closer to um, April 2nd, we'll realize that a lot of these tariffs will be just bluster. There is people in the United States working hard for us as well, including CEO Jim Farley and GM's Mary Barra to get, like one of the big things is the auto tariffs, because our economies are very much interlinked, right? So hopefully they can diffuse a lot of this stuff, and it turns out to be just a lot of bluster, and we can get on with our lives.
That would be nice, but I don't think Trump has any intention of letting anyone get on with their lives, really, does he? He's full of beans. Maybe he'll get tired soon, but I mean, it seems like he just wants to ruffle feathers in all directions, doesn't he? But this interview here there's an interesting bit a bit later on. It is worth watching the whole thing because he talks about how, in his view as an economist, and anybody that's familiar with the kind of things economists say will know this already, but he says that Canada applying retaliatory tariffs is a stupid idea, basically, in so many words. And he says that Canada should kind of resist the urge to hit back, because obviously that is just putting a tax on products that Canadians buy.
It hurts the consumer. It doesn't hurt the American. You know what I mean? Like it really hurts the consumers. What we need to do is figure out different trade partners so we're not at the mercy of the Americans. That's what we really should be doing, and figuring out how to get our gas to market and our oil and gas to market, and figuring out how to get that's our main export is our oil and gas. How to get it to market.
Totally, and that seems to be something that a lot of the political figures, the main political figures in Canada, have figured out. As we've covered recently, a lot of talk about new pipelines and so on, but we have to wait and see if any of that is actually going to materialize.
The now declared not going to run again Heritage Minister Pascale St-Onge, taking her last run at it as well, now came out and says the internet's too free, and complained that there is no control over free expression on the internet. And that her remarks come 6 weeks after the Cabinet's latest bill to censor content lapsed in Parliament. They had that bill that they were going to run, so they couldn't do it because Parliament's shut down. And she says we're in challenging times, and and we hear a lot about freedom of expression. We need to make sure it exists and that it's protected. It's a foundation. But she's saying that it's really hard for like their government to get their message out with not a lot of backlash from people, right? So.
Well, it's something that I find very interesting about this. I mean, that line is the most interesting, I think, where she says, freedom of expression is currently being exploited and undermined. I just find that to be such an interesting thing for somebody to say. And it's increasingly this left-right divide in politics where the right, just look at like J.D. Vance a few days ago in Munich, where he's really pushing the Europeans and anyone else that was listening to really sort of think about freedom of speech in their societies and how important it is, really kind of pushing that First Amendment kind of approach to freedom of speech. And then here we have a liberal, like a sort of on the left, if you want to say that, talking about controlling speech. And it's the same in Germany, it's the same in Britain, it's the same everywhere. There's this left-right divide. The right wants freedom of speech, the left is very suspicious of it. And I just find that so interesting, because obviously anybody that studied political history knows that it used to be the other way around. Not that long ago, like 40 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe, it used to be the other way around. And I just find that to be such an interesting switch there, such an interesting change. But I would also say to Pascale St-Onge here, who's talking about how important it is for, she often says this, how important it is for misinformation not to circulate, and how important it is to get the truth out and to have like a society built on journalistic principles and so on. I would say to her, she probably isn't listening, but we know Chrystia Freeland is listening. Maybe if Chrystia can send her a text. Why don't you tell your media servants to reply to my numerous emails? Because these are people who are paid well over six figures to sit in an office and respond to emails from people like me, and they are refusing to respond to my emails. So that would be a start, I would say, Pascale.
Yeah, her last quote here, and this is a Holly Dillon Blacklock story too. And again, you can subscribe to her work It's on Blacklocks. Her last quote here, the worst thing about all this is, says on St. Onge, is we have no control over the direction these platforms will take and how they will increasingly shape our relationship with the world. So, that's part of their whole thing with Bill C-18, controlling Meta, and they want to control over Google and all that stuff. I mean, it seems odd that these people that used to be really supportive of free speech are now really supportive of controlling speech, especially the platforms. And then in response to that, she went on CBC, and we're going to play a clip here, and she wants to double the amount of money that CBC gets to fight what she calls misinformation. We'll play this clip here.
The criticism of the company is that it gets $1 billion, $1.5 billion in round numbers and doesn't necessarily deliver the audiences and the service that Canadians want. Your argument is that Canada, on a per capita basis, gets less money than most G7 countries, and you're proposing going from 33 per capita, which is CBC gets now, $33 a year, somewhere close to the average of $62 per capita. What's the amount, and do you really think there's an appetite for that kind of extra spending in this point in time?
Definitely, and I don't think that we should get distracted by a minority of voices who say that the CBC should not exist anymore. In reality, for the past number of years, close to 80% of the Canadian population supports a better CBC. And the investments that I'm proposing are, yes, aiming towards the middle ground of the other G7 countries, but it's also...
The middle ground between 33 and 62, or $62 per capita, your middle ground?
No, I'm saying that there's a lot of...
room there.
There's a lot of room there. What's important is that the CBC gets the public funding it needs to be able to fulfill its mandate and make sure that it's servicing Canadians both in French, English, and 8 Indigenous languages across the country. So it's a large mandate, and the public funding has not increased since the 1990s, even though there's been inflation and the rising cost of production. So I understand that some Canadians are disappointed in what CBC is able to give them. What I'm saying is we need to support our CBC better, because CBC Radio-Canada will never, ever be owned by tech oligarchs, billionaires like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. It will always belong to Canadians. And more than ever, we need it as one of the tools to better defend Canadian sovereignty, our own history, our own culture, our languages, and our right to unbiased information.
Okay.
Well, there you go. Just as she's leaving too, just like Justin Trudeau threw out that close to $4 billion for SNC-Lavalin. Here's Pascal St-Onge doubling the amount of funding to go to CBC. And it has gone up, and she's kind of like messing with the stats a little bit there, because if it's $33 per capita as our population grows, so does the funding for CBC. And they've been asking for more money all along.
I don't know if is that how they figure out the funding arrangement? They always do it per capita? Or is she just using that as a measurement?
She must be using it as a measurement, but they have been increasing their funding. They've been asking, they laid off a bunch of people just before Christmas there, and then also took bonuses at the same time.
Yeah, well, I just think that whole... I watched her press conference when she announced all this, and then I hadn't seen that interview, but listening to the interview, this is just all political posturing, isn't it? It's all just piffle. It's absolute piffle. She's talking about Mark Zuckerberg taking control of CBC. What? What are you talking about? What on earth are you talking about? Who's even suggested that? What a completely fatuous thing to say. Which makes me think, and also doubling the CBC's budget. I mean, for God's sake, none of this is realistic. It's just, there's an election coming soon. I'm going to say something and try and get attention and try and excite the base. That's what it is. If anybody, if anybody was struggling to figure that out, that's all she's doing now.
Yeah, I don't think they get a lot like the I can't remember that commentator's name or the anchor there, but he's right in that there's likely not a lot of appetite for doubling the budget of CBC.
But also, she's gone on about how non-biased the CBC is. I mean, again, if you want to live in what Vladimir Zelensky called a disinformation bubble, then good for you, you can stay there. But not very many people think that the CBC is a source of unbiased news. The majority of Canadians, again, if the surveys are to be believed, and that's all we really have, but according to those surveys, the majority of Canadians do not agree with that. They think that the CBC is biased, as does every serious, analyst of the media recognizes that the CBC has a left liberal bias, very, very clear and obvious to anybody in this business. So again, that's wrong. Canadians don't want to double the budget of the CBC. They don't think it's unbiased, and I'm pretty sure as well, if you ask them, they don't think that Mark Zuckerberg is going to try and steal the CBC and control it. So all of that's just nonsense. I cannot believe that that woman is being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. Like, what's the point?
Liberals increase Sudan war refugees quota. That's Mark Miller. And Quebec says, not for us.
Yeah. Yeah, but they can, don't forget, they can sponsor them and then send them to other places in Canada, just not Quebec. So somebody in Quebec can sponsor as many as they want, but they won't be coming to Quebec.
Quebec seems to have more power than anybody, right? They get to say that, because I remember Mark Miller once saying that provinces don't have a right to refuse refugees.
Yeah, he said he was going to hire. I can't remember the exact words he used. So he said he was going to basically fly them over to provinces, and that really upset David Eby. I remember he came out and said that that was a stupid idea, didn't he? And like,
He said it was daft.
Was very
actually.
angry. Yeah, he said it was daft.
The word he used was daft. Yeah, and that was that interview that I did with him.
Yeah, I mean, but also Sudan. I mean, on a more serious note, sort of Quebec exceptionalism. We're used to that, aren't we? That's just kind of, you can just apply that to every story that in Canada, pretty much, and that'll be a good guide. But when it comes to Sudan, he's talking about another 7,000, bringing the total to 10,000 Sudanese refugees. I mean, there's obviously a cost factor there. That's incredibly expensive because these people will be supported by the Canadian state at great cost. You can look on the federal government's website at the sort of furniture and linen and all the rest of it, allowances that they get, thousands and thousands of dollars. Obviously, I mean, I think most people probably know this. Refugees are very expensive, costs a lot of money to bring somebody to the country and then to like support them in those first years. But also Sudan there's a civil war going on in Sudan, has been for a long time. It's an extremely dangerous place. And it also doesn't have very good, just like Gaza, because obviously Mark Miller is also pushing through a Gaza scheme to bring people from Gaza into Canada. But similar to Gaza, in Sudan, it's very hard to have like records of people because it's not a particularly well-run state. It's had a lot of misery and misfortune over the decades and dictators and whatnot, and it's hard to know who it is exactly that's coming to Canada. So it's another one of those schemes, I think, where it's rightly controversial and is going to come under quite a lot of scrutiny because ultimately everything that the Canadian government does should in some way be in the interests of the Canadian people, shouldn't it? I mean, maybe I'm just naive thinking that. But if that's true, then they kind of have to show the Canadian interest here and show that these people have been vetted and that, much as they want to come to Canada, I think we also need to show that like we want them here too and that they'll be good for us too.
Agreed. Doug Ford, he's saying the biggest problem that we have in getting, not relying on our trade partner to the south is just getting out of our own way. We're going to play this clip here from Doug Ford.
You just said in your speech that the biggest barrier is not in Washington or Beijing, but in Ottawa. Yeah. How is that showing a united Team Canada front?
Well, on this internal trade and making sure we get critical minerals out of the ground. So everyone's heard of the Ring of Fire. This has been going on for 25 years. Assessment after assessment after assessment after assessment. Where are we going to have assessments the rest of our lives? Well, America and the rest of the world are trying to eat our lunch. One of the most powerful tools we have in Canada is our energy and our critical minerals. Enough of the assessments and waiting around. And, you know, we're doing assessments up there with Martin Falls and Webequie First Nations. They're loving it. We got to deal with Arrowland. I'm going on the northern tour. I'm going to be hitting Cochrane, Timmins, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie. I'll be up there, and I think there's 5 altogether. I think I've named all, and Thunder Bay, sorry, Thunder Bay. So we're going on a whirlwind tour up north. And I tell you, the people up north want the critical minerals. They want the forestry. They want jobs and security. And there's no one that wants jobs and more security than the First Nations communities that I've talked to up there. And I've mentioned just 3 of them that will bring jobs and opportunities and electricity to their communities.
You know, that's one of the things that just really bothers me when I hear news outlets say that question, that we're not allowed to criticize right now because, you know, that doesn't show unity. We've done this all through COVID, and it doesn't do us any good if we're not allowed to criticize. How are we supposed to get better? Because we've had regulation problems all across Canada. We have we have interprovincial barriers to trade. In British Columbia, we've done so many stories on the forestry sector. And the number one reason the forestry companies say they don't want to deal with it here is the regulation, and you can't get stuff done. Like, that's why they're leaving. And that's Doug Ford pointing it out. And what does he get from the reporter that doesn't show unity, right? So we're supposed to just suck it up all the time so that we don't upset the Liberals, or what?
But again, it's like a bit like with that BC coroner thing. It's like, do these people just not like democracy? Do they have something against democracy? Because that's my immediate question, my immediate sort of concern. Democracies are noisy and boisterous, and there's a lot of disagreement, especially at times like this where there's a lot at stake. That's kind of the whole point of a democracy. Do people not? I just feel, sometimes I feel like I just need to get these people and throw them in a classroom with like 11-year-olds so that they can learn the system that we live in.
Yeah, they find a talking point and they just stick with it. I mean, that one that was used, like, you know, like when the Bank of Canada said, don't worry, go out and get that mortgage, do whatever you can, we're not going to raise the interest rates. And then they raised them 19-fold in an unprecedented manner. And then, you know, when they was criticized, they were told that, you know, like criticizing Canadian institutions at this time. And it seems like there's never been a good time to criticize bad economic policy by this government.
Yeah, or as you referenced, COVID, health policy, or any sort of policy really. And as you know, anybody that's been paying attention for the last well, at least the last decade, it's just been like one crisis after another, hasn't it? So there's always an excuse.
Right.
If you're the kind of person that wants to find an excuse to try and shut up dissent, then you'll always find one. There's always an excuse. I mean, we've even seen this in the drug crisis. Like to go back to that former BC coroner, the drug crisis in BC, it's almost been like it's been seized upon as an opportunity to tell people to shut up and to accept only one possible, one possible assessment of this crisis. But that's completely wrong. It's a crisis. That means that's all the more reason that we should have different voices coming in, because it affects so many of us.
What I find really odd, though, it's the reporters asking this question. You know, you could see if it was the other side that was saying, you know, that this is not a time to, you know, question things because they'd be looking after their own party. But why are the reporters asking that question? It's like they're doing the work for the other side.
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why so many Canadians are so massively disappointed in the media landscape in Canada. I mean, and again, not to go back to that grave site, but during COVID, where was the media during COVID? Where was the press? I can remember numerous times tuning in to listen to Justin Trudeau at a time when the lockdowns were very controversial, and he would announce some fresh lockdown, and then 3 or 4 reporters in a row would ask him the question, why didn't you do this sooner? And why didn't you go even harder? Almost like ignoring reality that there were people out there that thought it was a bad idea, thought that it was controversial, you know? The press, increasingly in Canada, the press just have no ideas. They don't have any ideas of their own. They seem to just live in a sort of, well, quite literally, a government-funded bubble. They just seem to like align themselves with the ruling class in Canada.
Yeah, and then let's move on to the Liberal leadership race. Ruby Dalla with an impassioned little speech here after they investigated her for election interference. So we're going to play this clip here from Ruby.
Today has been a really emotional day after reading about these allegations. To all those that think that there may have been any foreign interference in my campaign, I want to make it very clear that there has been none. I am of Indian ethnicity. It doesn't make me any less Canadian than anyone else who may not have my skin color. These allegations are baseless, and I will never allow anyone to use my ethnicity, my heritage, my culture, and misconstrue that for foreign interference. I am in this race to make history as the first woman of color in Canada to become our nation's Prime Minister. I have entered this leadership race to bring our party back to the centre, and most importantly, to stand up for Canadians and fight for Canada. I look forward to seeing all of you in Montreal on Monday and Tuesday.
So yeah, there's Ruby Dalla. She was investigated by the Liberal Party. I guess they don't like it that she's rising in her polls anyway. She's showing that she's in second there with Mark Carney. And she's been basically ignored by the media. Carney's getting the bulk of the airtime with CBC and CTV and all that, and Freeland getting some too in some podcasts and that, but Ruby Dalla not getting a lot of attention at all.
Yeah, they definitely don't like her, do they? Because she's a wild card. She's not on the inside. I don't think she has many friends in the Liberal Party, in the establishment, let's call it that.
I think
So she's just kind of like, she's sanding their sneakers, really, isn't she? She's just annoying to them. I think they want to get rid of her.
Yeah, they tried to block her from the French debate as well, and then I think she had another platform piece that went out that she's bringing the Liberal Party back to the center.
Well, not talking like that. I don't think she's going to bring them back to the center. Like Megan, is it false? Let me think about how I'm going to phrase this for legal reasons. Making unsubstantiated claims about racism. That's not centrist, is it? Those are the tactics of the extreme far left. So I don't know if I can believe her when she says that about being in the center, because nobody that I know, no serious people have said that she's that the foreign interference is going on in her campaign because of her skin color or ethnicity. Nobody said that. She's just said that.
I think she's
just made that up.
A good question for the Liberal candidates: will they accept the results? Because there's 400,000 registered for this vote that starts on February 26th to decide their leader for March 9th. I guess the question should be asked: will they accept the results? Because it was pretty easy to sign up for this stuff, and they're saying there's a lot of bots out there, and how they're going to qualify this. This is like basically an internet poll to pick the leader, to pick the next Prime Minister of Canada. It's basically an internet poll to pick the next Prime Minister of Canada, because that person will become the Prime Minister, even though it might be for a short period of time.
Yeah, it's a funny old way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah. So
I mean, I think my suggestion would be, if anybody but Mark Carney wins, then there'll be an investigation. If he wins,
I'm
then
saying.
Bob's your uncle.
Will they accept the results? Because I think they've already determined what the results are, and if all of a sudden Ruby Dalla wins, I mean, how will they scrutinize those 400,000 people that registered to vote in this internet poll, really, for the February 26, 2025 there? I've been getting a lot of emails, I tell you. And I got one
did say that they were going to investigate ahead of time, didn't they? So I guess we'll have to wait and see. And they're going to have to reveal how many applications that they refused or whatever.
So I got an email, or email actually from it was a text from Chrystia Freeland saying that asking if she could count on my vote, and then here's her phone number to text her, or here's an email to ask for questions. And I texted back, and it bounced, and it said this number doesn't accept text. I'm like, okay. So I tried the email address, and I tried the Chrystia Freeland with the Y spelling, and it bounced back and said it doesn't accept emails. And then so they had a different one in there with the Chrystia, different spelling, Chrystia without the Y, and I tried that one as well, asking some questions and asking for an interview as well, and that one bounced as well. So not really
Democracy in
accepting,
action.
not really accepting any questions, just will you vote for me, and tell you that you can ask questions, but if you actually ask a question, then you get the good old bounce.
And they say that Mark Carney's the unreliable boyfriend. Maybe she's the unreliable one. Unreliable girlfriend in this case.
Nobody wants to talk to you, I guess, right? Anyway, any more sad news here in the Hamas murdered hostage brothers? It says those children were killed with bare hand. Oh, I can't even say it. So
Yeah, I mean I don't blame you. It's horrific, isn't it? And it's kind of one of those things where you kind of like a Clockwork Orange. It's like you have to force yourself to look at it because it's so disgusting. It's so repulsive.
like I don't know
But
how people can kill children with their yeah. I don't even know. I sorry, I can't even talk about it. Sorry.
yeah, well, and this is October 7th. Like a lot of people haven't even looked at this. They don't understand what's happened to Israel and the Israeli people. They've experienced a kind of like collective trauma that I think it's very hard for the rest of the world to understand. They're on a completely different level right now. So when the likes of our Prime Minister says something about the Israeli military operation in Gaza, like something unfavorable, and doesn't seem to recognize why Israel is doing that in the first place. You just have to look at things like this. Like the Israeli people have been, they've gone through a kind of like revolution in their emotions, I think, and they're behaving differently than they have in the past because of what's happened. So I just think it pays to kind of actually look at it and see why is Israel, why did Israel go into Gaza and to a lesser extent Lebanon? It's because of stuff like this. Like they had their world turned upside down by this stuff, and yeah, I think it's important to look at it and try to understand it.
I don't think I'll ever understand it. Apple pulls the data protection tool after UK government security row.
Yeah, this is massive. This is a really huge story because Apple, I mean, I'm sure you know this with your knowledge of tech, but I feel like even most people know this in the sort of general public. Apple is like extremely protective of stuff like this. And there's been a number of occasions where like a terrorist or something is like killed loads of people and then shot himself and left his iPhone and and the government or whatever, the police have tried to get into it and ask for help from Apple and they just won't help them. This has happened loads of times and it's been like quite controversial and Apple's like stood its ground. And then the British government came out, or it was revealed like last week, I think, that the British government had ordered Apple to remove its the highest level of data protection that it has. I think it's like APD, isn't it? Advanced, well,
Yeah.
or ADP, Advanced Data Protection. You have to
ADP,
yeah, you've got to enable it in your settings. But that basically makes it all your data like end-to-end encrypted, like untouchable. And then Apple says, we don't even have it, and we don't even know how to like access this because it's like so hardcore because that's kind of one of their that's how they advertise their products, don't they? It's like super safe and secure. But anyway, the British government has said like we need to get into that because we want to investigate, we want to look at people's photographs and texts and stuff. And then Apple said, well, Apple didn't say anything actually, but now they've just announced that they've removed that feature from everybody's phones in the UK. So now you just don't have that in the UK, and the government can just get in and look at your iCloud.
In the Zelensky stuff, Trump and Putin meeting depends on progress to end Ukraine war. Lots of stuff going on there, but J.D. Vance backing Secretary of State Marco Rubio after later accusing President Zelensky of backtracking on a deal that will give the U.S. share of the company's minerals in exchange for aid. So yeah, so lots of stuff going on there. Vance, Rubio, and then.
Well, yeah, this is like, so Rubio's trying to say that Zelensky like agreed to it.
Hmm.
He said, yeah, sure, like I'll just get it through Parliament. This idea that the Americans can take a cut of the rare earth metals in Ukraine, like the profits from those,
Yeah.
digging those up. And then afterwards, according to Rubio, he then went and said, no, I said no to them. I told them no. So he's accusing Zelensky of,
Yeah.
double talk, I guess, being two-faced. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? This is like the Americans wanting they want payment for the aid. Well, I say the Americans, the Trump administration wants payment for money that was given to the Ukrainians by the Biden administration. So once again, it's kind of the Trump administration just refusing to honor
I
the
did.
promises made by the Biden administration.
I did listen to a bit of a clip on one of the things was a deal like with aluminum, and it was a foundry that's been destroyed by Russian bombing, and they're saying we'll help you rebuild that foundry, and then in exchange for that we'll take half of it, and I think it was Trump that was saying that foundry alone could provide all the aluminum that America uses in a year. That'd be its only source of supply of aluminum, and that's how big that foundry is. So Ukraine is a very mineral-rich country, including like potash and stuff like. It's very similar to Canada, and in Canada we don't really like Doug Ford says, we have so many barriers in our way for us to utilize our natural wealth. And like the Russia and Ukraine had been utilizing much of that.
Yeah, well, Ukraine, and this is also true of Russia, but Ukraine's biggest obstacle to sort of prospering from its natural wealth is the endemic corruption in the country, which has been a problem since it got independence after the end of the Cold War. I mean, because Ukraine is like generally considered to have the world's most fertile soil, the black soil, which is actually found in the sort of greatest quantities in the land that Russia's stolen, which is very interesting actually when you look at it as a war for resources in a way. But anyway, even before the Russians stole that land, Ukrainians were selling that soil. They were packing it up into like shipment containers or whatever and sending it off around the world because it's so valuable. It's so like nutrient rich. So that's just one example of the kind of thing that's been happening in Ukraine when they try and make the most out of their like blessed land, which is so rich in resources. They've run into this corruption and like these oligarchs who pilfer the country, just rob from the Ukrainian people.
It has been the playground of the corruption of Europe and Russia. Like, I mean, they used it as kind of like a sandbox for corruption.
Yeah, well, I mean, even right down to like people, they sell women, like human trafficking. They sell women to the Middle East as like basically sex slaves. I mean, it's like Ukraine, and that particular phenomenon has been going on for thousands of years, unfortunately, for Ukraine. But I mean, it's a very sad story. The story of Ukraine, it breaks your heart because you're right, like it should be so wealthy. In many ways, Ukraine sort of could and maybe even should be like the richest country in Europe, or the richest big country. It's got the potential to be there, but it's just kind of, like you say, obstacles somewhat worse than the obstacles that we face in Canada to sort of building our wealth. But it's very, very sad. Every time I read about it, it just breaks my heart really, because the Ukrainian people they've just been slapped about for the best part of 3 centuries or something like that. It's dreadful.
And then the really sad part right now is like I did an interview with a gentleman here in Kelowna who runs the Friends of Kiev, and he said if you're in Kiev right now, there's no men of serving age. They're either dead or they're at the front lines, and it's just horrific, the amount of dead people that have for Ukraine and for Russia, young men and women that have died in this horrific war. And it's, like they're saying now that it's like almost like I listened to a general saying that it's similar to World War I fighting, like a lot of trench warfare, a lot of really gruesome fighting, and they're saying the body count could be in the range of 2 million on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, when we finally get the accurate numbers, I think it will shock people because I mean it's been devastating, hasn't it? And then that's when, you talk about the missing people, like the missing men, but also a lot of the women and kids aren't there, are they? Because they're in Poland or they're in, the UK or Germany or Canada. They've come as refugees. Like it's hard to imagine that, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to kind of imagine that when we sit here in this kind of peaceful, safe country that we're lucky enough to live in. It's hard to imagine the towns and cities being like depopulated and the whole country being torn apart.
And
It's a terrible terrible war. So
the
horrible.
amount of destruction is unfathomable. And I think maybe if they showed more of that, people wouldn't be so against a peace process right now.
Well, I
Let's
mean, the worst one is a couple of years ago when or 3 years ago, I think it was in 2022, I think, where they could have had a peace there. I mean, that's if they end up getting this peace and it's worse, and it looks like it will be worse than the one that they could have got a couple of
right.
years ago, then that's going to be like that's just even worse,
And that
isn't it?
was
It's just
and that
horrifying.
was the Americans that nixed that peace deal, and I believe the British was in on that as well.
Yeah, Boris, I think, was the messenger. Boris Johnson was the one that said no.
Let's move on to markets. Gold, our friend there, continuing to go for that mark. It's going for that $3,000 mark. I've heard a few analysts calling for 3,300. Again, a lot of political uncertainty in the world, still with those wars going on, and so a lot of overspending. Like the United States trying to pull in their spending because they're racking up trillions of dollars of debt. They're trying to rein theirs in. Not so much here in Canada yet, but maybe. At some point, we're trying to rein in our spending and make our dollar more worthwhile. But gold continuing to show strength, though. And in Canadian dollars, that's banging on the door, $4,200 Canadian for an ounce of gold. And I can remember back in the first Iraq War, what was the first Iraq War called? Free Iraq or something.
Are you talking about Desert Storm?
Desert Storm.
Operation
That's right.
Desert Storm, yeah.
Yeah. That one, I think gold was selling at that time around $250 Canadian an ounce.
Wow, that's a hell of a return, isn't it? And we're also going to find out, I mean, they've said, haven't they? I think Elon has said he's going to look in Fort Knox. Has Trump said that as well? I mean, that's going to be interesting because that is the world's largest
A lot
collection
of
of gold,
people
isn't it?
have wanted to look in there, and we just, like it's almost like the JFK files. Like everybody wants to know, but nobody seems to get an answer. There's been many, many people, including politicians in the United States, asking for a tour to Fort Knox, and it's never been kind of like shown. And supposedly there's a lot of gold in transit moving from London to the U.S. right now. Maybe that's playing a shell game. They move it back and forth, and maybe there's only one pile. A lot of it maybe just in the basement of Buckingham Palace, maybe.
Or maybe Goldfinger, with the movie, was a documentary, and Goldfinger actually somehow got it, and he actually took all that gold from Fort Knox.
Or maybe they're delaying it because they still got to get all that gold spray paint to could paint all those bricks, those red bricks. There was a time in the United States when they seized everybody's gold, and you were told to turn in your gold, and that was in the early part of the 19th century. The president said nobody was allowed to own gold, and you had to turn it in. And then after everybody turned it in, then they doubled the price of gold because that was when gold was set at a price, right? So
they also, the Americans, ensured that they emptied the British treasury of every single piece of gold that they had in exchange for crap old ships while Britain was fighting the Nazis. And then they made a lot of films afterwards talking about how great they were and how they saved the world voluntarily out of their generosity. But, I'm not bitter or anything, my American friends, but you did take our gold.
There you go. Do they have it? Bitcoin,
Yeah.
the young man's or young woman's new gold is looking to, it looked like it was going to challenge that $100,000 mark again. It looked like it was making a move, and it's kind of pulled back there. It's at 98 when I pulled this. I think right now it's at 97. It swings for, like in that range there. You can see that the chart there, how it kind of like bobs along there. But I do believe technically it looks like it's set up for a decent move there. So again, the wind is in the sails of the Bitcoin. Canadian dollar. There you go. Looks like it doesn't believe in the tariffs. So it's showing more strength than what tariffs would suggest, for sure. So there you go. Canadian dollar not buying in.
And that's good news, isn't it? For now, at least. Let's hope it continues on that trajectory.
I'll tell you again, if there's an election and Canada gets a leader that supports our natural resources, you can expect a major bounce from there. And it would show a lot of strength in our Canadian dollar, which would decrease inflation in Canada as well. So a path to tapping our natural wealth would be a boon for our dollar. Don't remember, back in Stephen Harper days, the Canadian dollar traded at 110 US over the American dollar. Not many people can remember that, eh?
It's an amazing statistic, that, isn't it? Amazing fact. But that was during the oil sands boom, I believe it was?
Yeah, but you know, the Swiss franc and the Canadian dollar used to trade very much at the same level. Like you could, the Swiss franc and the Canadian dollar used to trade very close to each other. And the Aussie used to be quite a bit lower than the Canadian dollar. And the Aussie is lower right now. But again, the Swiss franc used to be, you know, like that's kind of like a, you know, a safe place to put your money as well.
Yeah, that gold, Krugerrands, and Swiss francs.
There you go. Good place to hide your money in Switzerland, I guess, right? Let's move on to our AI. Well, sticking with this though, we did, and I do have an interview coming up with Gavin Dew. We're going to talk about, because David Eby did say that the Canadian dollar is the reason why that they're not going to do that $1,000 grocery rebate, and I would say to David Eby, like, you know, it's actually recovered, so that excuse doesn't really hold very well. And then the other one is he said that nobody will invest in Canada since the Trump tariffs, and that's been going on for a while. So again, that one doesn't hold a lot of water either. So that's why I've asked Gavin Dew to come and do an interview on that.
Yeah, I mean, come on, people have been complaining about capital flight. This is one of Pierre Poilievre's one of his main like points that he makes. If you listen to Pierre Poilievre on any given day, there's almost certainly he will mention all of the hundreds of billions of dollars that have gone south. I mean, this has been going on for a long time now, and it's to do with, to an extent, it's to do with Joe Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act, which kind of like seduced a lot of companies down there with preferential treatment, didn't it? But also, it's been blamed on taxes and regulations in Canada. So yeah, that's poor fare from our premier there, isn't it?
There's a comment here about the Canadian gold. For some reason, Canada is one of the leading mining, like we have some of the leading miners in Canada. And like, you know, like guys like from B2 Gold and Barrick is going to move to the United States, by the way. And, you know, like we had Goldcorp, we had all these major gold companies, and they're all mostly mining in other parts of the world. And our Bank of Canada decided to sell our gold a long time ago, and we have no gold in our reserves. We sold them willingly because we said gold. They said that gold had no future in world banks, and turns out they were wrong, as usual. And we actually sell Canadian debt denominated in U.S. dollars. That's how much faith we have in our own Canadian dollar. I mean, if that doesn't sound ludicrous, I'm not sure what is.
But there was no business case for keeping hold of the gold.
Apparently not. Anyway, another great decision. Let's move on to our AI segment. And this is at a Figure. You know, like we've seen lots on Optimus. We're going to play this video and just show you what Figure's up to. There's another biped maker of robots. Go ahead and play that clip.
Hey, Figures, can you come here? Okay, I'd like to try something new. Even though this is the very first time that you've ever seen these items, I'd like you to use your new Helix AI and try to reason through where you think they belong in the scene, and then work together to put them away. Does that sound good?
You can cut it there, Ronald. There you go. Working together yet. These robots were using vision-based and with learning, and they've decided how to hand off stuff to each other and put stuff in the fridge that belongs in the fridge and put stuff that belongs in the cupboard in the cupboard.
It's a pretty, I mean, I can't help but look at it as a bit scary as well, but it is also absolutely amazing, isn't it? And did you see that one, that Polish what's the name of that Polish company? Like Clone Robotics or something. They also put out a video recently, which is of a sort of Android style robot it has like muscles, and you can actually see its muscles.
Yeah, I did watch that one
It's
too.
kind of
Yeah.
It's very interesting, but it's like just when I saw that one there in the kitchen, I mean, probably it's realistic to say that within our lifetimes, most people will have access to these things. And I'm just imagining kind of you come home from the store or whatever, and you walk into your house and just like bump into one of these robots and like, oh, didn't see you there, Mr. Robot. It's just kind of crazy.
Or even a better scenario is like, who has more control over the robot, you or your partner? And if you come home and the partner has more control and they packed your bags outside and the robot's standing in front of the door and says, you're not coming in.
Yeah. Access denied.
And the same thing goes when they start using these things for policing. You can scream at them all you want. It's likely not going to deter them from doing anything other than arresting you.
Yeah. It's, it surprises me the extent to which this has just happened. It seems to me anyway, like really suddenly. It's particularly with robotics.
You're talking about your lifetime. I would say by 2030, many, especially in the Western world, will have robots, bipeds. I'll say bipeds, because there's already robots on the road. Like, there's no doubt about it. The Tesla cars you see out there are already robots. They're using vision-based learning, and I drive one, and I use it every day. And it's vision-based learning, and it drives me back and forth to work every day. Like, it's every day. So that is a robot in itself. There's vacuums out there that vacuum your house. There's now lawnmowers, and I watched the piece yesterday. It says like nobody should have to cut their grass anymore because there's so much technology out there that will, like self-cut grass and all that kind of stuff. So there's tons of robots already operating. The bipeds is the next level, right? Like the servant at home kind of thing that does your dishes, walks the dog, acts as your security. I mean, don't forget these things will also act as security too, right?
Yeah. They can answer your door. If you're not sure if it's a scammer, just send the robot.
Yeah. Let's move on to our EV section. A couple things here. Acura in a major U-turn, axing popular cars as drivers urge automakers to keep options rolling. So they had said that they were going to be, had a goal of amassing 60% EV sales by 2030 and completely into the EV thing, I think, by 2040. And that now they're saying, let's be a little more flexible, and that it'll be more of a windy road, and they're going to kind of like work on the hybrids too. And I think a lot of that has to do with what's going on in the U.S. there with dropping those EV mandates and that. And I think a lot of the legacy automakers, including the Japanese automakers, were having a real tough time making that jump into the EV world from the ICE world, right? So
that's another thing that happened quite suddenly.
To the EV world from ICE, yeah. What's that?
That's also something that happened quite suddenly, I think, where it seemed to me it happened over a space of like a year or two, where EVs went from being a bit of a joke to being completely dominant and like the best cars in the market.
Yeah. So here's something interesting though too, that failed deal with Nissan and Honda when they decided when Nissan said that we didn't really like the deal. They actually have right now, and it was a former Tesla board member, Hiro Mizumo, including the former prime minister, is they're going to try and persuade Tesla to invest in Nissan. They're saying that, like maybe Tesla can get access to all their Nissan manufacturing plants in the US. And so they're going to pitch Tesla on buying Nissan or merging it in underneath their umbrella. There's something unusual, right? At
and
first,
what would Tesla get for that?
Their manufacturing plants. And, I mean, I'm not the one pitching it. I'm not sure.
Justify it.
I'm not sure what they would get at, but here's a good demonstration of what you were just talking about. And this is a post out by Tesla on, and I've talked about this many times. There's about 20 moving parts in a Tesla drivetrain. It's very simplistic, right? The Tesla drivetrain, right? Compared to, 2,000 plus moving parts in a traditional ICE gas car, right? Like, you know what I mean? You got an exhaust system, you got a transmission. There's no transmission in Teslas. There's no drive line. There's no drive shafts and all that stuff. Exhaust, coolant systems, all those things. And then so they're very simplistic compared to an internal combustion engine car. Like if you look at this, the center of the top image there is the battery pack, and then the motors, and this one happens to be a dual motor. There's two motors on the wheels. And then, with the ICE car, you have the engine, the transmission, the drive shaft, the rear end, and all that, right? So, and the exhaust system.
It looks like a Hot Wheels toy, doesn't it? The Tesla one. That's how straightforward it is. Whereas the BMW one looks like something from about 1885.
Yeah, and they've been refining that since Henry Ford rolled the first Model Ts off the line. There's always I guess incremental improvements that we've seen over gas cars. And I've driven many a gas car. And I think my first car was, people are going to love this, a 1970 Maverick. That was my first car. Bought it for $200, I think it was. $200 was my first car. You know when you could buy a car for $200?
Now you can buy half of the groceries you need for the coming week.
If you're driving a pickup truck, you'd be lucky to fill it up for $200.
Yeah.
My dad used to we didn't have a lot of money. We grew up very poor. My dad would put $5 worth of gas in at the gas pump. And that would last us, like the week usually for $5, right?
The good old days. And I imagine, a couple of miles south of where you grew up, it would have been even better than that, even cheaper than that.
Yeah, and I don't know, for $5 right now, I don't even get to squeeze the handle once. It's almost like the cab fare. You get into the car when they turn on the meter, it already starts at $5. You're just like, what? You put the nozzle in it, I think it starts out at $5.
Yeah, I mean, you might struggle to get a bottle of water for that in the sort of gas station store.
Yeah, I think one of the comments here is you can't buy a used cell phone for $200. You can't buy much for $200, right? You surely can't buy an ounce of gold anymore, right?
No, not like the good old days.
And then we've got our meme here, and this one is as I thought was pretty funny, but because you see this in the gyms all the time, as most people recording their workouts, and then she's forced to go back and redo her whole workout because she forgot to record it.
Well, you see a lot of the videos where they kind of it's a woman recording herself, and then a man just he doesn't know what's going on. He just walks along and picks up some weights or something, and then she shouts at him. I've seen a lot of those. I don't know how many of those are fake though. I mean, I feel like a lot of those are staged.
I think a lot of those. Babylon Bee is good for the meme though. That's their shtick, right? Making you laugh, right?
They're basically like one-liners, aren't they? That's kind of if you think about what their trade is about.
They do some videos too, they do some spoof videos if you go watch them, right? If you're looking for something to do to burn daylight or whatever, you can do a lot of that. So that's our show for today and for this week, and we do appreciate the comments, and we do. We're going to try and putting them on the screen too. I think Romo is trying to do some of that too, right? As long as they're not nasty, but. Yeah, so I mean, the comments there, I think this one guy says, best cars on the market is BS. I live where it's cold. Well, I've driven mine in the cold as well. Calgary gets pretty cold in Calgary. They're not as effective in the cold for sure, but I've driven to Calgary many times and Vancouver over the connector. It all depends on your use. I used to drive a 1-ton diesel. I understand the uses for those big trucks as well. So. To each his own. One can be right. Two things can be right at the same time. That's one thing that people need to get used to. Two things can be right at the same time. Right? There's some wisdom for you today, right? Two things can be right at the same time. There is no absolutes other than zero.
Yeah. Just mathematics, really. If you want absolutes, that's what you should do.
Yeah, like absolute zero is one of the and here's a physics lesson. You can't add cold, you can only take away heat till you get to absolute zero. Ponder on that for a while. And that's like anything else, right? Anyway, any thoughts to close off there, Ian? Anything, words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. Well, we've got the Liberal, I don't have wisdom, but I can give you this. We got the Liberal debates coming up. That should be interesting. See, I would anticipate that everybody's going to gang up on Mark Carney, which is what usually happens when there's a favorite in a debate. So maybe, it might be interesting because he hasn't really been put under a lot of scrutiny so far. So it will be interesting to see how he handles it, how he handles that kind of pressure. So that's what I'm thinking of. And is there anything else? Just wait and see what the latest mad Trump announcement is, really. We all live in Trump's universe. So it's always good to see what his next Truth Social is going to be.
Yeah, don't forget Edison EV trucks. Assume you've ever had them on the show. I have interviewed Chase Barber. We've had, and also Kent has interviewed Chase a few times. Chase has had his trucks at the auto show as well, and I've been to the auto show when his trucks have been there too. And it's actually a pretty good idea. Chase Barber does those, takes old logging trucks and puts motors in them. And then if you think about a logging truck coming down a hill with a full load on, all that regen braking, that's how you're going to charge that battery up in a hurry, because you're using the battery, actually the braking of the battery to recharge the battery. It's genius, actually, right? So there you go. And his tagline is Edison Motors stealing Tesla's ideas. Because I think it was Edison that stole Nikola Tesla's ideas, right? There's a whole thievery thing going on there, right, with Nikola Tesla. And yeah, so somebody just said, didn't Tesla just recall 700,000? I think it was 280,000 vehicles, but they don't actually recall them. It's over-the-air software updates. And so their recall is a matter, most people don't even notice the recall. It's updated over the air. So that's, like a bit of a, but you still have to do the recall notice. So anyway, just letting you know that we do respond to the comments though. So over the air updates are done automatically. If you have it turned on, then your car will update automatically. So don't even notice it. Most recalls when I've had a lot of Bowtie Guy used to have a ton of Chevy products, and anytime you had a recall, you had to take it in, leave it there for whatever, and then go pick it up and all that stuff. Whereas most of the Tesla recalls are over the air. There you go. That's it for today. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now. We hope you subscribe, share this with a friend if you like, and if you like just like us talking about the news, and you want to join in, definitely comment, and then we'll try to get to as many comments as we can. Until then, we'll see you Monday. Enjoy the weekend, and we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News